Welcome to this special episode of Untold Chronicles, Through Her Eyes. Today, we're not just walking through an art gallery. We're stepping into the shifting gaze of history. How were women once seen? And when did they finally begin to be seen on their own terms? Let's begin. 15th to 17th centuries. Women as fantasy. Step into the Renaissance, a time of discovery, invention, and big ideas. But when it came to painting women, artists stuck to one idea: fantasy. Women were painted not as people, but as symbols. Venus rising from the sea, Madonnas glowing with virtue, wives frozen in pearls and patience.
Painters used mythology and religion as a kind of disguise. A nude woman wasn't just a woman. She was Venus. That made it acceptable. But make no mistake, these images were made for men, and from their point of view. Even in portraits, women weren't really seen. Their faces were turned, their eyes downcast. Every detail, jewelry, posture, even pets, was chosen to display obedience, beauty, and status.
The female nude is not a woman. It is a construct, a symbol, a mirror for the male gaze. But some women found a way to paint back. Sofonisba Anguissola painted her sisters, playing chess, laughing, learning. These weren't goddesses, they were girls, and they were thinking.
Few women became artists at this time, but those who did, like Anguissola, carved out their space with subtlety and skill. Their subjects were often family or themselves, but they brought emotion, personality, and a quiet kind of revolution.
In a world where women were painted to please, some artists were already planting seeds of something more. 18th century, portraits of performance and refinement. We now step into the Enlightenment, a time when the world was dazzled by elegance, intellect, and powdered wigs. But behind the silk curtains and classical columns, women's portraits became performances, not just of beauty, but of expectations.
In Rococo art, everything sparkled. The gowns, the gardens, the skin. Women were painted like porcelain, soft, charming, and wrapped in ribbons. These portraits were all about pleasure and status, showing off wealth, flirtation, and refinement, but not every canvas was drenched in gold. Artists like Jean-Baptiste Simeon Chardin turned their gaze to middle-class women, mothers at home, daughters reading, wives preparing meals. They showed the quieter beauty of everyday life.
Then came a shift. As revolutions stirred and Enlightenment thinkers questioned tradition, art took a turn toward neoclassicism. Suddenly, frills gave way to form. Women were now posed like Roman statues, calm, serious, and full of virtue.
Neoclassical portraits dressed women in drapery that mimicked togas and surrounded them with columns, books, and symbols of duty. The goal wasn't to seduce, it was to impress. A woman was still performing, but now she had to appear wise, moral, and composed.
Her portrait smiles, not because she is happy, but because she knows how she must be seen. So whether she was twirling in Rococo silk or seated like a Roman matron, the 18th century woman in art played the role expected of her. Her portrait was her stage, and the world was watching. 19th century, intimacy and observation. Now let's step into the 19th century, a time of rapid change, industrial growth, and artistic rebellion. Cameras were arriving, cities were growing, and painters, they started looking closer.
This was the age of realism and impressionism, movements that captured life as it was. For women, it meant something new. They were painted reading, resting, thinking, not for show, but simply existing. Artists like Mary Cassatt and Berthe Morisot gave us glimpses into quiet moments. A mother brushing her daughter's hair, a girl lost in a book. These weren't grand or glamorous, but they were real, and that made them revolutionary.
Still, access was limited. Women artists often painted domestic scenes because those were the spaces they were allowed in. But they made those spaces matter. They turned the personal into something powerful. There's nothing small about a life fully observed. At the same time, the invention of photography was changing everything. Suddenly, portraits weren't just for the wealthy. Ordinary women could be captured in a real moment, laughing, frowning, aging, with no need for myth or marble. This was a turning point. Women weren't just painted to be looked at. They were painted as people, and some were even holding the brush. 20th century, expression and identity. We enter the 20th century, a time of revolution, both artistic and personal. As modernism exploded and world wars shook the globe, women in art began to break free from the frame altogether.
This era wasn't just about being seen, it was about speaking. Female artists began using portraits to explore their inner lives, their pain, their pride, their politics.
Frida Kahlo painted her heartbreak, her heritage, and her body. Georgia O'Keeffe embraced nature as a symbol of feminine power. Tamara de Lempicka redefined glamour on her own terms.
These weren't idealized women. They were complex, flawed, fierce, and finally, in full control of the image.
I paint myself because I am so often alone, and because I am the subject I know best. Portraits were no longer silent. They shouted, whispered, dared you to look deeper, and for the first time, the woman in the painting could meet your gaze and hold it. 21st century, beyond the frame. Now we arrive in the 21st century, a time when identity is fluid, representation is personal, and the canvas is infinite. Portraits of women today are more than art. They are statements, reflections, dialogues.
Contemporary artists are challenging everything: the gaze, the medium, even the definition of portrait. Some use photography, others paint, and many use digital tools. But what they share is a desire to show women not as objects, but as authors.
Cindy Sherman plays with identity itself, stepping into different roles to deconstruct how women are seen. Amy Sherald paints African American women in dignified hues of gray, defying stereotypes and reshaping narratives.
And on platforms like Instagram or TikTok, women now craft their own image, instantly, globally, and unapologetically. The portrait is no longer confined to canvas. It's in pixels, profiles, and posts.
Representation is the beginning of freedom. When you can see yourself, you can shape yourself. Today's portraits ask new questions. Who gets to be seen? Who gets to define beauty? And what does it mean to truly see someone, not just as a subject, but as a self? We've come a long way from the downcast eyes of Renaissance brides. Now the gaze is direct, bold, and entirely her own. Conclusion. From fantasy to identity, from myth to meaning, portraits of women have always said more than we first see. They reflect not just a sitter, but a society. We began with downcast eyes and ornamental gowns, signs of beauty and obedience. But across centuries, brushstroke by brushstroke, women have turned to face us, with intellect, with emotion, with power. To be looked at is one thing. To be seen, truly seen, that's another. Today, portraits don't just tell us who she is. They ask us, how do you see her? And perhaps more importantly, how does she see herself? Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this exploration through art and time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share Untold Chronicles, because sometimes the stories hiding in plain sight are the ones that change everything.